episode of my PhD advice series. In the last one, well, which was the first one, I spoke about how to apply for a PhD, and that included how to choose a university and a supervisor, as well as how to actually write the application itself. And in that video I said that I would like to make a future video about whether you should do a PhD or not, because that's a very different question to how to apply for a PhD. So that's what this one is. This video is in large part inspired by Simon Clarke's video, which I will link somewhere up here. I really liked that video and I think you should check it out if you haven't already, but I think I have some different things to add, so I wanted to make my own version. So in the first half of this video I'm going to talk about reasons that you shouldn't do a PhD. So that's not why you shouldn't do a PhD, but things that shouldn't motivate you to do a PhD, in my opinion. And then in the second half I'm going to talk about things that should motivate you to do a PhD, or I suppose what I deem to be the criteria by which, if you fit them, you will probably enjoy doing a PhD. That was a very long-winded way of saying the reasons you should do a PhD. But a bit of a disclaimer, I think that I am quite idealistic about my reasons for doing a PhD compared to some people that I know who are a bit more career driven perhaps. For me it was more of a kind of lifestyle change and a sort of just life trajectory change, I guess, from the private sector that I was working in before. So I'll get into it more, but just I think that's good to keep in mind. You might be quite different to me in terms of your motivations. So obviously take what I'm saying with a pinch of salt, see if you think that my approach fits with your approach, because it might not. It's also the hottest day on record, I think, in the UK today. It's meant to be 34 degrees, I think, today, which is crazy. So if I'm sweating, that's why. Hello, it's Zoe from the future. I have decided, I was just editing this vlog and it's turned out quite long, so I've decided to split it into two, and actually I think it will work better anyway. So this video is why you shouldn't apply for a PhD, and then next week will be a different episode which is why you should apply for a PhD. It might make this video seem like a bit of a downer, unfortunately, but just be aware that next week will be a lot more upbeat and will be all the things that I love about doing a PhD, so it should balance itself out in a week's time. I hope you enjoy. Bye! Let's go! So this is part one, reasons why you should not do a PhD. Basically, it comes down to what motivates you. If you are heavily motivated by money, I wouldn't recommend doing a PhD. And that's because even if you get funding, you will be earning significantly less, probably, than your peers. Like I said in my last video, I am funded by the ESRC and I get paid £16,500 a year, which is quite a bit less than I was paid in my last job. I graduated my undergraduate degree in 2013 and then I worked for a couple of years in TV, and then I did my master's part-time and I worked in a greetings card company for part-time as well. But in both of those jobs I was earning more than I earn now. So I've taken a hit to do the PhD, financially speaking. For me, I don't care about that. As long as I have enough money to live, I'm much happier doing a PhD because it's what I really want to do. And it doesn't bother me on a regular basis that I'm not earning as much as my friends. But some people would be really bothered by that, and that's fine. You know, it's a legitimate reason to not do a PhD, especially if you have dependents or, you know, you're really going to struggle to pay rent, because it depends where you live, but certainly in London it's very expensive, and if you have less money it can make living here a bit crap, basically. And aside from that, even after you finish the PhD, it's very hard to get a job in academia, and you're very likely to have to move to wherever a job comes up if you want to get a job, or if you're quite motivated by your career, future career. So in that sense, even though you might earn more in the end having a PhD than if you didn't have a PhD, actually there are loads of other jobs that you could do that don't require having a PhD that would pay more. And also, let's say you take 3 or 4 years to do your PhD, if you're doing it full time, that's 3 or 4 years where you're not on the career ladder, so to speak. Or you're on the academic career ladder, but you're not on the any other career ladder where you would climb up quite a bit in that amount of time. So relatively speaking, you might be starting out after the PhD at a lower level than if you hadn't done it at all. Also, it really depends what your point of reference is, because obviously jobs are very widely varied in terms of income, and it also depends where you live. But if you want to work in academia, you're probably on average going to earn quite a lot less than other professional jobs that require some quite high level of education. Things like law and medicine pay a lot more. Once again, that really wasn't a concern for me because I never was interested in doing those jobs, and also I'm not that interested in earning a lot of money. So it just doesn't matter to me very much, but obviously it is something that a lot of people care about, so it's just something to keep in mind when you're thinking about applying for a PhD. So that's point number 1, money. Not great. The second reason why I think the PhD doesn't suit everybody is because it can be quite lonely. It's very self-led. You're not working in a team, or you might be doing some work for projects, research projects and stuff, and you do have colleagues in your department, but essentially you're doing your own project on your own, and you have a supervisor, but you might meet with them every couple of weeks in the first year, and then less and less as the project goes on until the end, when maybe you have a flurry of supervisions because you're stressed out about not finishing or something. But essentially you are your own boss, you're setting your own schedule, you're probably working from home, or you might go to a library or go to uni. You can work wherever you like, which is a plus as well, which I will come on to. But basically, if you're someone who finds it very hard to motivate yourself, as I do at times, and I have struggled with, PhDs are tricky, to say the least. You really need to find that self-motivation and know that you can really lead your own work and that you won't be miserable, because I think a lot of people really thrive on having a team, working in a team, and a PhD isn't really that's not what it is. Obviously, on the flip side, that's great for people who love working on their own and are really self-motivated and love setting their own schedules. So that's just a question of personality and working style, but you should definitely think about how you fit into that binary, I suppose, of teamwork versus lone work before you apply for a PhD. The third reason is a bit of a funny one. Basically, a PhD is really hard work and no one really cares what you're doing. Which is, what I mean by that is that it's blood, sweat and tears, a PhD. I've only had 1 year so far. It's been great, but also quite stressful at times. I know that it's going to get harder when I get to really getting into the writing. But at the same time, there's only a couple of people probably who will ever read it. And you might find that your friends and family, depending who your friends and family are, don't really care about what you're studying that much, because, unless you happen to share your interests with your friends and family, I suppose. Academia is a very particular type of pursuit, and, I have lots of interesting and intellectual conversations with my friends and family, for example, but I don't usually talk in detail about the theory, for example, or the real meat of what I'm studying, because it's just very specific and they're interested to a certain extent, but not necessarily that much. So there's a weird dichotomy there, where you're both working really hard and your brain is you're stretching your brain to its absolute capacity, but at the same time the stuff that you're studying isn't really of interest to a lot of people, or it's just it's just really niche. So like there's a few people who you can talk to about it, maybe. Obviously if you have a good research community at your university, that's great, because that will offer you that kind of, I guess, that kind of conversation about your work. But essentially a lot of other people won't really know what you're doing and won't really care or understand what you're doing that much. Unlike if you do a job, for example, that's really recognisable, like, I don't know, I'm a teacher, or I'm a builder, or a doctor, or whatever, where people kind of understand what that means. I think a lot of people are a bit bemused by PhDs, and inevitably some people will just think that you're wasting your time because they're not particularly interested, or they don't think what you're doing is worthwhile, whereas other people might be impressed or really enthusiastic about it. But I wouldn't assume that people will always be like, wow, that's so cool, you know, basically. And I suppose that last point ties into the question of like prestige. I think some people think that PhDs are very prestigious, but other people think they're a waste of time. So I wouldn't do it because of what other people will think. In other words, it's not worth doing something like a PhD to impress people, basically, because firstly, it's not going to impress loads of people, and secondly, it's way too much hard work to do just because of what other people think. The fourth reason why you shouldn't do a PhD, in my opinion, is if you don't have the sufficient enthusiasm and passion and drive about a very particular specific topic. I guess it's an obvious thing to say, but you're going to be studying one particular thing for 3 or 4 years full time on your own steam, and if you don't have that kind of real enthusiasm and excitement for your topic, then you're going to hate doing a PhD, because that's basically what it is, you know. If you know that you're someone who gets really enthusiastic but then easily bored by things, it's a terrible thing to do, because it involves a very sustained level of enthusiasm and hard work throughout 3 to 4 years, if not longer. So that's really important, because you might find that you just, you know, you do the first year and that's great, and then you get bored, or it gets really hard and you don't want to do it anymore, but you've wasted a year if you drop out, and you just don't want to start if you don't think you're gonna finish. This is Zoe from the future again. Now that I've decided to change this into 2 videos, it has no conclusion, so this is me saying goodbye, and come back next week for why you should do a PhD. I hope you found this useful, and I hope that I didn't seriously put off anyone from doing a PhD with this video. At least come back and watch the next one if you're not sure, because it's a lot more uplifting. Okay, bye!